Now, to explore this global shift and its political ripples, we are joined by Justin Thomas Russell, the Executive Director of the Global Foreign Policy Center in Washington, a longtime observer of public opinion trends and U.S. policy shifts towards Israel and Palestine. Welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us. Now, The Guardian describes this moment when boycotting Israel, that when boycotting Israel went mainstream. From your point of view, has anything fundamentally changed?
Well, always good to be with you as always, my friend. Look, the reality is, yes, things are changing. Now, let's be clear about one thing, that the situation that has occurred over the past, let's say 48 to 72 hours with the announcement of the agreement and with the meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh is going to be a big defining changing moment for that. However, what we have seen is what was called out as a couple of college students on a campus declaring to Harvard and Yale and Columbia and some, and Ben and Jerry's divest their Israeli interest. As the war in Gaza went on over the past 2 years, we saw a much more organized and a much more defined call for isolation economically of Israel. Did it have the effect that it had in, let's say, South Africa, as you pointed out in the opening of the segment? It's unclear because it hasn't been the duration that it was in South Africa. But let's be clear about one thing. Economic international isolationism that Israel was feeling was having an impact on their economy, an impact on public sentiment. Quite frankly, was probably, had this gone on, could have been detrimental.
And do you think, when it comes to the United States, that this shift reflects the moral outrage at Gaza's destruction over the past 2 years? Or is it a broader generational rejection of U.S. foreign policy when it comes to Israel?
Well, I think that, as is the case in U.S. politics a lot, it is where the wind is flowing. Even some of your more left-leaning moderates were still defending Israel after October 7th. But as they saw the humanitarian crisis grow, as they saw the continued loss of innocent lives in Palestine, the women, the children, the elderly, and then having an impact, even innocent loss of lives in Israel, that back and forth, I think, took a toll on American public sentiment. And we started seeing a waver and the pendulum swinging towards calling for isolation of Israel, even economically, sometimes politically, as the war continued down that road. So, we are still unsure of what the end impact will be when it comes to the economic call for isolationism. Was it becoming more common? Yes. Was it becoming a louder cry? Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason why we started also seeing a shift in the Trump narrative as well.
And over here in the Middle East, we've seen quite massive boycotts of American corporations, from Starbucks to McDonald's, because of their alleged Israeli ties. How sustainable is this new consumer-driven form of protest? And it must have, often these companies are franchised, aren't they? But it must have quite a detrimental effect on their businesses here.
Oh, absolutely. Look, you want to change public opinion, you hit corporate America in the wallet. You start taking money away from their revenue. You start taking away from stockholder dividends. Guess what? You're going to make an impact on U.S. policy. What you're going to see also is, look, we look at the comparison between what's happening in the economic isolation of Israel and what happened with South Africa. They were making, back in the 80s, they were making videos, music videos, trying to control the narrative. A large group of 80s rockers made a video called "I Don't Want to Play Sun City." That was to take out the largest economic resort in South Africa. That's how they made an impact. And you're starting to see it become more and more as today's information world intertwines with today's economic world. We're going to see this become more of the norm, where policy pressures from corporate America will be driven by the consumer market that runs it. If I can't make the money, back on the investment that I've made in places like Egypt, in the UAE, Qatar, Oman, name any Arab state, Jordan, then then all of a sudden, if I'm losing money because of my government's practice or support for a questionable action taken by one of our allies, then yes, we're going to put pressure on the White House to fix this, because we are in the business to make money, and the policy affects our bottom line. We're going to affect your policy.
Let's talk a little bit about South Africa, shall we? They have been quite a big player in recent events. They've been taking Netanyahu, reporting him to the International Criminal Court. And when we go back to that period of apartheid, do we see, you mentioned that it's too early to tell, perhaps, but are we seeing parallels between what happened to the South African state at that time during apartheid? You mentioned rock and roll music in the 80s. We've seen quite a lot of that, haven't we?
Yeah, yes. I mean, are we going to compare Benjamin Netanyahu to de Klerk in South Africa at the fall of the Afrikaner rule in South Africa? No, I don't think so. I think, and also let's be clear about one thing. Mandela and de Klerk actually had a mutual respect and a relationship that helped bring the end of apartheid. That they sat down at the table together. That is completely different than the mantra of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Palestinian people, whether it's Mahmoud Abbas or Haya as the head of Hamas. He won't talk to them. He wants them destroyed, and he's made that perfectly clear. So it's hard to make that distinction. Where the distinction does lie, though, is the isolationism. Let's look at the fact that this call for isolationism wasn't necessarily driven by the Arab states. It was the U.S. allies that were calling for this. You're looking at England, England, Spain, France, some of our biggest NATO partners were the ones that were calling and isolating Israel, even in their calls for the Palestine and recognizing the Palestinian state. So what we're seeing is, as opposed to what we saw in South Africa, where the isolationism really didn't change much, it was the internal strife that changed it. Make no mistake about it, is our analysis, we believe, is that it was outside pressures, and mostly economic, that helped drive the situation and the political policies to where we are today. Make no mistake about it, is that economy in Israel falters. That lies solely on the hands of Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's going to have to answer many things. So I think that's why we're seeing where we are today.
And the Biden administration and the Trump administration oppose this kind of activity. Where do you think the Trump administration is on this now? If, God forbid, things don't go well with this ceasefire, is Trump still going to be as friendly towards Netanyahu, do you think?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, the reality is, and here's what we have to consider, is, look, you and I have been on screen together enough times to know that I am not exactly the biggest proponent of Donald Trump foreign policy. What I will say, though, is that in this case, Donald Trump and his team realize that these are not just political maneuvers, but these are maneuvers that affect the people that back him, and that's corporate America. When corporate America starts speaking, again, when you start hitting corporate America in their wallets, in their revenue, in their dividends, that's where the impact in policy goes, especially when you look at somebody who is supposed to be a deal maker, who campaigned on being the successful businessman that he is. It is business that is going to drive this. It is the dollar that is going to drive the U.S. policy. Netanyahu, on the other hand, is going to feel that, because when your largest economic and strategic partner, backer, is starting to wane away from you and start making comments like, we may not be able to give you all this defense equipment that you need. The companies that traditionally invest in hospitality, recreation, even auto manufacturers over there, defense manufacturers, all those companies are going to sit there and go, you know what, maybe it's now not the right time to make that additional investment. That is something that is going to impact Netanyahu and have an effect on him, or how this election may go in Israel a year from now when there's higher unemployment, higher inflation in Israel. That's going to be an issue he's going to have to address.
And some people call these boycotts collective punishment. They're trying to hit Netanyahu and the policies of his government towards the people of Palestine, especially, of course, most recently in Gaza. Others call them moral accountability. What's your view?
Oh, wow. You know what? One man's moral accountability is another man's punitive punishment. I don't think it's fair to put a broad brush on it like that, only because of this way, is because of the fact that, if it is a moral objective, if you're trying to gain a moral objective and change a policy, then again, if you can use it for good, if this stops the worsening of a humanitarian crisis that has been growing for 2 years now, then absolutely it is a moral imperative that you use the tools around it. But again, at the same time, if you are defending Israel, if you are saying, like, look, Israel has the right to defend itself, this was all started because of a terrorist operation that was conducted by Hamas, which killed 1,200, still holding 47 hostages in captivity. If you look at it that way, then it would, is it punitive? No. Then, you can't really say that. You can't really blame them for defending their homeland and protecting their people. It's just that when you go over the line, when you overreach a little bit in your objectives, that's where it gets dicey, and that's where there's a gray area between punitive and a moral objective.
And finally, Justin, do you think this economic isolation will continue, even if Israel does go through with the phases of ending the war in Gaza?
It's unclear. Look, let's be honest. Western companies have made investments in Israel for since the creation of Israel back in the late 40s. What we're going to see is a continuation of that investment under the radar. Yes, I think what we'll see is that they will continue to push and grow the businesses there in Israel. Out front, in front of the cameras, we might see a little bit of hesitation. I don't think they're going to highlight it as a key market to the public. But I think that if this holds and we continue to see, and then also let's also consider the fact, again, we have elections in Israel next year. If those elections take out the Likud party, if Benjamin Netanyahu faces defeat and and the opposition comes in strong numbers, then that is going to be almost a fuse to light to get economic incentives back into Israel, so we can see a calmer, more economically viable position for Israel and Palestine in the region.
Well, thank you very much, Justin. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. Justin Thomas Russell there, joining us from Pennsylvania from the Global Foreign Policy Center. Thank you very much for joining us